Hello, welcome to podcast number 10 here at The Idea of a Man. My name is Omar Zach Phillips, and I'm so glad you're joining me for another one of these awesome podcasts. I've thoroughly enjoyed this process of beginning to create podcasts for The Idea of a Man and creating content in general, actually, writing articles and beginning to populate this website, which is going to be a powerful message and a powerful place for us as men on our journeys, so that we can basically begin to ascertain um, our own idea of a man and walk in the sovereignty of our own choices, our own truth, our own conclusions, as opposed to subscribing, say, to externally kind of obligated ideologies that are oftentimes imposed on us by society, by our family, by whichever pressure some ideological perspective is pushed upon us. You can subscribe to whichever ideology you wish to. Here at the Idea of a Man, we're not here to try to either get you to subscribe to our ideology, or any particular ideology, or to try to take you away from the ideologies to which you subscribe. However, we are here to challenge you to be intentional with regards to your ideological subscriptions and to think really with regards to what it is that is a resonant truth for you, what resonates with your reality, your perspective, the way in which you see the world, and also to think what the impacts of your subscriptions are upon your own life and upon the lives of others. Because to live on intentionally, particularly as an adult, really begins to become debilitating. It's really an infantilizing way of living, a childish way of living. It doesn't really enable you as an individual to realize your full potential and all that's possible for you, particularly as a man. And we use the word man, and the word man really kind of relates, I guess, to an adult male. So are we adults? And a hallmark or a marker of their adulthood really is our capacity to choose, our capacity to think, our capacity to reason, and our capacity to make decisions and choices for us that are right and that line up with us. So from that perspective, the idea of a man is really all about us deciding for ourselves what our idea of a man is, coming to conclusions about that, and then living that reality in our world by intention, by choice. So this is going to be podcast number 10, and what we're discussing specifically today here at the Idea of a Man is spirituality. And no greater subject perhaps to kind of get into with regards to imposed external subscriptions that will perhaps try to get us to live particular ways, particular lifestyles, and subscribe to particular ideologies, which can, if we subscribe to something that really is nefarious or detrimental to us, really impact our lives in quite a big way. And so it's so important, really, I guess. Certainly in my life, I've gone through that journey. On my journey, whereby there was, the religion that I was raised in, the religion to which when I became a young adult, I subscribed to. And I had to make decisions and learn and really look into on a deeper level. And as life has progressed and unfolded, coming to a personal way of interacting with the spiritual dimension has become something very, very important to me. So we'll get into all that in a few moments as we go through what we're doing here. So this is, as I say, podcast number 10. What we're doing here at the Idea of Man, in the initial podcasts we're doing, are simply going through what we call the 12 chambers, the 12 steps, 12 stages of the Idea of a Man. And I'm going to quickly whittle through what those are, which is, first of all, the first three are surrounded in identity, for kind of locating yourself and your on the geography of your own life. Like, who am I is the first question. Where do I fit? And then how do I survive? And we put a line through survive. How do I thrive? So now that you have got a handle on who you are, your identity, now you know kind of your where you want to fit yourself and put yourself in life and in the world. How are you going to take this life from the survival mode that we all find ourselves in, where we just keep ourselves going, to a place where actually life becomes a meaningful, purposeful experience, and we're thriving in life? Because without that, we go right back to the statistics that we have around men's lives, which are debilitating. Men committing suicide, men committing violent acts, men getting imprisoned, men high on drugs or using alcohol to kind of anesthetize the pain of just experiencing their life as a man. Men who are having failed relationships, men who are having, and the list goes on. There's so many different ways in which life can become a negative and destructive experience for us as people, as humanity, full stop. Here at the Idea of a Man, obviously, we're concentrating on men's work, concentrating on the experience and the journey that we go through as men, because there's a whole sort of aspect of psychology that relates specifically to us as a man, which I think needs to be explored, and also for me as an individual, for whichever reasons, my own heart has a particular penchant toward the journey that we go through as men. I know in my own lived experience as a man, there has been many questions and many things that I've gone through, and there's been times in my lived experience when I've really kind of cried out to spirit and have asked, like, why do I go through these things? And I must be honest that there was a time in my life where there was a resonant kind of response that I felt in my keenly within myself that came back to me, that was that the experience that I've gone through are happening so that I can speak with experience into the lives of other men. And that was at a time when, my life wasn't necessarily going anywhere fast. I didn't really know that I would be creating content like this per se, although I began to have the intimations of that going on within my life. So the reason why I'm saying that is simply just to explain that that the idea of a man specifically is working toward the journey that we go through as men and the complex moving parts that they have. So initially we have to lay that foundation. Who are we as unique and individual men? What is our idea of a man? Let's ask and answer those questions. From that point onwards, we can get into like practical things of, okay, how do we survive on this earth? So we're looking at business, finances, recreation. From there, we get into the relational aspects of ourselves and how we interact with others. So we look at, intimate relationships, our familial relationships, like our family, and then we look at our friendships and our companionships and just the whole sphere of interacting with other people on the planet. And now this last kind of quarter of the 12 chambers is going to be the 3 existential aspects of our lives, in a sense. They're not all existential because we've got to go to spirit, soul, and body. And body, I suppose, is not existential, but yet we frame it into a context where we understand that the body is not a standalone unit, that there is the soul and the spirit, which we're going to be exploring, and that those have a major part to play in the lived experiences of our body. And also that kind of by doing our body right, we both open our bodies up to the ability to have more, say, spiritual experiences, but also from a spiritual perspective, when we understand, say, that our soul is traveling through the universe in this avatar, in this physical body, at this time and space, that we realize that to fine-tune our bodies so that we can fine-tune the experience that our soul is having is also like a responsibility that we could perhaps pay attention to as men as we travel on this earth. But that will be something we'll discuss more as we get to that particular stage in our conversation, which will be podcast number 12 by the time we get to talking about body. But now we have to talk about spirit and what that is. So yeah, absolutely, let's jump right in. I think first things first, to understand, say, the idea of spirituality and as it differentiates itself, say, from religion. Spirituality really is kind of the study of spirits, whether that be spirits traveling and traversing in the spiritual dimension, like embodied spirits that are connected to that have been inside of people, benevolent and malevolent spirits, and also the realm of the spiritual. That's another aspect of things. The realm of the spiritual, really, I suppose we could call the realm of the spiritual everything that pertains to that which is beyond the physical. Okay, so when we talk of, say, soul, we're talking about something that exists in the realm of the spiritual. If we talk about like us as individual men, we talk about our mind, and oftentimes we could just kind of interrelate that with our brain. You say mind, and you sort of think towards your head, you think towards upper echelons of who you are, and you think, okay, and perhaps you just get a picture of a brain inside, but then you stop and say, well, there's 2 different words, brain, mind. So yeah, exactly. The mind is not the brain. The brain is obviously the thing that's inside of your skull, but the mind is something else. And what is the mind? Does the mind exist in the physical dimension? Well, clearly not. It actually exists in the realm that is beyond physicality and the sphere from which your thoughts come and all these things. We talk about, you might have heard the statement, all learning is remembering. And at first blanch, it sounds ridiculous, but then when you begin to really consider what that means, you realize that there's a truth to that in fact, there is like a universal consciousness that oftentimes we tap into when we learn new things and we hear new concepts and ideas, that in fact there's some kind of resonance within us that says, yeah, I kind of know that that's true. Why do you know that that's true? Well, because you are tapped into something that transcends this incarnation of you here and now in the physical dimension. And so therefore that awareness, or tapping more into that awareness, brings you into the quote unquote spiritual dimension. Likewise with, say, something as simple as the heart, that pumps the blood around you. You know, if you see like a picture of the chakras and you see the 7 chakras kind of go through the person's body, you'll notice that the heart is actually in the middle, but we know that the heart that pumps our blood is over to the left-hand side of our bodies. So therefore, when we talk about, say, the heart chakra, we're not talking about the heart that pumps the blood. We talk about the heart that falls in love with somebody or has emotions or anything, or you talk about kind of connecting your heart as a man and being more connected to that aspect of yourself. You're not talking about the heart that pumps your blood, although the heart that pumps the blood might be affected by what's happening within your heart, very, very, very true and very really, because we are holistic beings. We are body, soul, and spirit. We are all connected up. Our minds do connect to our brains. What's going on within our brain will affect what's happening in our mind, and vice versa. The truth be told, when we're talking about the heart chakra, for example, we're talking about something that transcends the physical dimension. We're talking about an aspect of ourselves which in fact exists in a dimension beyond physical, and therefore we're talking about the spiritual dimension. So therefore, when we talk about spirituality or spirit, we're talking about that which pertains to things that are beyond physical. And we interact with that dimension all the time, but many of us do so very unconsciously because we never bring it into our conscious awareness. Many of us do so without really thinking about it in the context of which I've just spoken, and so therefore it kind of just misses us and goes straight by. And so some of us might say things like, you know, I already have a spirituality, or spirituality to me is just kind of walking in the forest, or whatever the case may be. But in fact, when you realize that you are a spiritual being having a physical experience, then perhaps your perspective begins to shift on who and what you actually are and what this experience and existence is that you're having. And likewise, when we make that statement, for many of us who subscribe to that ideology that we are spiritual beings having physical experiences, I would like to flip it back the other way, that you are also a physical being having a spiritual experience, because the truth be told, your physical reality, your physical lived experience is also very, very pertinent to what you are experiencing right now here in the physical dimension. And sometimes as spiritual people, we can forget that. We can be so heavenly minded that we're not of much earthly good. We don't connect all the dots and holisticness, or bringing everything full circle. Living from a place of integration is really important for us as men across the board. And the idea of a man is in every way about becoming the integrated man, about becoming a man who can balance, you know, your family relationships, your friendship relationships, your intimate relationships, balance your spirituality, balance your business and your work life with your recreation life. It's all about living an integrated life and helping us as individual men to begin to live more holistically, more balanced existences, so that it takes away the dysfunction, takes away the things that can hamper us and hold us back from living a quality life, and also make us much more useful and beneficious to those who interact with us. Because you may and may not have, I don't know what your lived experiences is, but I know that many times the issue for us as men, and certainly it's been my part of my own experience, that when things are not aligned right, when there's dysfunction in my life, when I'm not living an integrated existence, that in fact my interactions with others doesn't become so meaningful, doesn't become so beneficial, and the feedback loop of that can be quite detrimental. You can kind of begin to feel like you're more of a pain in people's arse. You're more of a weight around people's kind of ankles. You're holding others back, you're holding yourself back, and life isn't moving in a flow harmoniously to the destination that anybody wants to kind of get to. And that's not a good place to be. And as a man, that can affect your self-esteem, and perhaps it's because of the low self-esteem that you find yourself in that space. So to address all those kind of matters, we need to kind of begin to think from a more integrated and integral perspective. We need to think about how we can live in a way that things do become balanced. So therefore, when we look at the area of spirituality, whether we are overly invested in kind of spiritual things, because that perhaps piques our interest, or perhaps that's the journey we've been on, we sometimes need to kind of dial back and begin to see what are the practical implications and applications of the spirituality to which I subscribe on this earth. So here at the Idea of a Man, what I want to promote and really speak on is practical spirituality. How do we make whatever spirituality do we subscribe to practical, in terms of how do we make it so that it's useful to us? How can we make it so that it's useful to others? So again, I don't care what religious affiliation you have, what subscription you adhere to in your own personal life. That's entirely your choice, and that's your business. I have my own ideologies and perspectives, the conclusions that I've come to with regards to what's going on out here and how I interact with the mystery that is spirituality in and of itself. But while that will absolutely pepper my articles and perhaps my videos, and I will talk about the things that ring true for me, that's not to kind of evangelize you or to try to persuade you of my persuasions. That's simply because I can only talk from my truth. But what I would encourage every single one of us to do is, as individual men, is to go on our own journey and ask real questions about what it is we subscribe to. And I'm saying this from depth of experience because, for example, I was brought up as a Christian. I was brought up in Christianity, and one of the hallmarks of that really is, in a sense, and it's not implicit necessarily, it's kind of ingrained in the way in which you're taught, that you shouldn't really ask too many questions because this is the way, the truth, and the life. That's just how it is. You need to walk in the fear of the Lord. The fear of the Lord, right? So you don't kind of want to be questioning and stuff. You want to be just walking by faith and not by sight. You want to just subscribe to this because that's what it is. That's how it is, and that's the truth. Okay. And those who don't see it that way are deceived. They're wrong. They're sinners. They're all those kind of judgmental type of appellations and ways of looking at the world, looking at yourself, and looking at those around you. And when in my own journey, I came to a place where I had to look at life from a very different perspective. I have a mantra which says, when you think you know the answer, life changes the question. And again, that comes from lived experience, from a time in my life when I had to question everything because that's what life was doing for me. Life was changing the question. I thought I'd come to some conclusions. I thought I had the quote unquote answer, and so therefore I was set. I was quite settled in my belief system and the way I saw things. But here it was. Life was asking something very, very different of me than the conclusions that I'd come to. And it was saying, well, what about this? What about these aspects of reality? Clearly, you can see this in front of you. How do you square that circle? How do you make that make sense? And so this is why I will always encourage us as men to be prepared to ask and answer questions. And I think it's so important to have a large mind. There's a song, "Free Your Mind and the Rest Will Follow." It's so true. If we are able to free our mind from the shackles of in-the-box thinking, of closed-minded perspectives, then we will see both a vista of possibilities, and also we could perhaps spare ourselves some mental illness. Probably the thing that spared me from going crazy at the times when everything that I thought I knew was being kind of shattered and reconfigured was a willingness to actually explore, kind of a level of curiosity, a level of, okay, let's go on a journey and see where this leads, and just an openness to the reality of the truth of the fact that perhaps there's more, and perhaps there's freedom on the other side of that door. And that was my experience, as I began to let go of my preconceived ideas, of the things that I've been pre-programmed to subscribe to. I began to experience a deeper level of freedom, a deeper level of holisticness, a deeper level of integration in my own life and experience, which for me was really beautiful, and is ongoing a beautiful experience, a liberating experience, a healing experience on so many levels. And I'm so grateful that my life opened up into new possibilities. And so therefore, from that perspective, I certainly do recommend that we have an open mind in the way we pursue our spirituality, and fundamentally also ask, this thing that I'm subscribing to, does it have any practical application? Because if it doesn't, if what we're subscribing to simply kind of locks us into a, how can we put it, into something that really holds us in some kind of confine, if it makes us, cruel, if it makes us believe that we have to kind of judge others and hold them to kind of to standards that perhaps deep down inside we're not even upholding ourselves, or that everything within us wants to do something completely different. Being really honest with ourselves, and this is what we talk about in going into the process of discovering and embracing your truth. Sometimes when you actually go on that journey, it's quite terrifying. It's quite terrifying to really be honest with ourselves and say, actually, out of life, this is what I want. These are the things that I want to achieve out of life. If you look at life, say, some of us might believe in reincarnation. Some of us might believe that we're only here the once. That's irrelevant to the point. The point that I'm going to talk about right now is the fact that for this lifetime that you're here, whether you are going to come back again, or whether you're going to go to, the thereafter, whatever that may be. While you are here, you've got this allotment, this slot of existence. And the question we all have to ask ourselves is, what are we going to do with it? Now, if we spend a whole lifetime doing things, saying things, being things that really don't reflect anything that comes from our hearts, aren't in alignment with the reality of who we are as a person, but we did them all because we felt obliged to do them. We did what we did because that was the right thing to do, because the religious sect, the religious ideology, the religious movement that we were brought up around, that we subscribed to, kind of had this value system, taught us to be this way, etc., etc. If that's the only real reason why we do what we do, I subscribe to you that there will be a time when perhaps you'll be lying on your deathbed and looking back on your existence and thinking to yourself, damn, I haven't even lived yet. Like, whoever I was, whoever this particular unique opportunity of existence came to this earth to be, has not actually shone its light, has not even been turned on, has not even come into experience, hasn't unfolded. Now, the unfolding of your life is really within your own hands. That's a choice you're making. You either have the opportunity to allow yourself to unfold in the truth of who you are, or to stifle that by putting on your top of yourself whole ways of thinking, belief systems, etc., that perhaps can hold you back. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't kind of try to find meaningful ideologies that help us, say, to live more moral lives, or to do things that are more helpful or constructive, that we shouldn't bring discipline to our existence. We absolutely should. But we have to ask ourselves, what are we disciplining ourselves for? So, for example, if I'm just simply disciplining myself because I need to be accountable and obedient to some spiritual guru, some pastor, some whatever, some imam, and this person expects these particular things from me, so therefore I have to, do this, that, and a third thing to make sure that I'm lining up with what they expect of me. At some point, you've got to realize, like we talked about at the beginning of our conversation today, you're a grown-ass man. You're an adult. Being a man lays upon you the onus of your adulthood. And when does it stop that you're not having like this middleman between you and the divine, between you and spirit, between you and source, between you and the emanation of existence? Like, I really believe in my own life that, our souls, which we'll get to in the next podcast, is in fact like the aspect of the divine, of the source that is spirit, that has actually been imparted into us as unique individuals. And if that's the case, if we've got the breath of life within us, if we've got a connection to spirit, then we don't need like a middleman. We might read meaningful, helpful books that kind of give us some spiritual insight. We might listen to a podcast like this that's discussing or philosophizing about spirit. And these things might help to kind of make our minds think in different ways and open up our perspective to possibilities. However, ultimately, there's going to have to come a time when we just sit with ourselves and say, well, what makes sense to me? And what is spirituality to my understanding, and how does that play out, So I guess what I'm saying is that we have to, for ourselves, really be accountable to that truth that really resonates and rings deep, deep down within, so that we can live out a life and flow out a life and unfold a life that reflects the truth of who we are. And then we should apply perhaps disciplines to living that life more, okay? So rather than living a life whereby the disciplines you do, so you get up in the morning. When I was a Christian, in my early adult life, I used to have to try to get up every morning and get myself to church, because the church that I was going to used to do things like morning prayer. Now, I lived quite a long way away from the church, so I had to get up very, very early, like 4 o'clock in the morning, travel across London, get to this place, do that before I went to even work in the morning. Most of us are struggling to get up to get to work every day, but I had to get up and do this nonsense before I even got myself out to work, and then I had to come back many evenings to get back to church, to get involved in some activity that was going on there. And then there'd be kind of activities on a Sunday and more activities on a Saturday. And then we'd be back the next week. It would be, this ongoing process. And I was married very young, and I began to have children very young. So my life as a young man throughout my 20s and 30s was exceedingly busy, just packed and occupied in doing a bunch of stuff that now in reflection, I begin to realize really didn't have anything to do with my value system, my truth, who I am. And I didn't know that at the time. I genuinely believed that this was the essence of why I was here. And part of the reasons why I was able to subscribe to it in that way was because as a person, yes, you're right. I have a spirituality. Like, I'm a spiritual person. Parts of me want to connect with all that is. I'm very aware that there's more to life than the physical dimension. That's why I can explain it the way I explained it earlier on, because I see the world that way. My mind goes there naturally. I'm aware of the fact that there's more to life than the physical dimension. And so, in a way, religion kind of hijacked that perspective and brought me into a way of, okay, because that's true, this ideology, which encapsulates all those kind of thoughts, is the way in which you need to kind of live out your spirituality. But remember, religion and spirituality are two very different things. Religion is us trying to like encapsulate um and kind of, yeah, basically put in a box our spirituality. Like, okay, let's have it over here in a little box which we can control, and if you can just stay within that box, then we don't need to worry about you too much. Because you see, the reality is, a truly spiritual person doesn't subscribe to nice little societal boxes. A truly spiritual person might be prompted to do something quite outside the box, might be prompted to grow up, might be prompted to not just follow the status quo, might be prompted to really kind of expand one's consciousness into different things. All throughout history, you can read about people who, when the quote unquote church, for example, was saying, oh, you have to do things this way, you should do this that way, were kind of challenging those sort of prescribed truths and seeing the world from more angles and seeing deeper realities and saying, no, that's not true. The earth might not be the center of the universe. There might be a bit more going on out there, and many other sort of ideas which you can read about various different thinkers who came to conclusions that challenged the status quo and the ideas that the religious institutions were trying to impose upon the masses. And so, likewise, there comes a time when we have to be able to not just think within the prescribed boxes of a particular persuasion, but actually think for ourselves and think as grown ass men and think as grown ass adults. And this is the beginning of maturity, number one, and also the beginning of being able to live a life for us that has a meaning to us. Because if your life doesn't have any meaning to you, but perhaps it has meaning to other people, so everybody else is like, oh yeah, this chap's a great guy, he lived that amazing life, because you're doing all the stuff that you feel obliged to do, what other people are perhaps requiring and needing of you to do for them to make their truth feel okay. One day you're going to look back with a deep sense of unfulfillment. One day you're going to look back with frustration. Perhaps even in the midst of your life, your subconscious is already feeling that frustration. Perhaps you're already experiencing and having to anesthetize the pain of a deeply unfulfilled and unmeaningful life. Perhaps in your existence right now, you are looking at your life and doing things and experiencing things that in fact you can't square, you can't make head and tail of. And sometimes that's because what you're subscribing to or what you are doing actually doesn't line up with your own values, because you are not prepared. You haven't plucked up the courage yet to look yourself in the mirror and begin to be exceedingly honest with who you are. And so this is why we have to say, if you are willing to discover and embrace your truth, because not all of us are willing. Not all of us have got the energy, have got the courage implicitly to actually look at ourselves and look at life from that angle. And for me to pluck up that courage to come to that place in my own life where I began to do so took a heck of a lot. It took it wasn't just something that I just plucked up the courage to do. It was because life became so unlivable outside of that sphere. I got confronted to such a point where I had to confront myself and deal with my own issues, and it actually get therapy, get help, and get external help to sit down with myself and begin to ask and answer the questions of what on earth was going on for me. It wasn't until I reached that particular place in my journey that the real questions began to be asked. Because for me, what was happening, and as a result, and this is why I'm speaking to this, because this may or may not be true in your own life, but as a result of living a life that was so untrue to who I actually am as a person, I began to engage in addictive behaviors and in things that were trying to anesthetize the pain of not living in alignment with my truth. And again, a lot of this was subconscious. So oftentimes when I was asking myself the questions of why am I doing what I'm doing, I didn't have straight answers in my mind. I wasn't able to see the correlation, the cause and the effect, what was actually fueling, say, behaviors that I felt like I couldn't control at that time. I couldn't see it because I was unwilling, I guess, to really look at and address the fact that the spirituality to which I was subscribing hadn't really been thought through. There's a statement: the unexamined life is not worth living. I hadn't yet examined, like really examined. I was philosophical. I was reading books. I was looking at things from a particular perspective, but I'd subscribed to an ideology that said this is the way, the truth of the life. This is how it is. So because of that dogmatic perspective that I had not challenged, that I hadn't looked it in the eye and said, "Wait a minute, are you true?" Because I had not been willing to have the courage to really look at it for what it was, even though there was challenges, in the world around about me. I still wasn't prepared in my own self to really look at it and examine and explore it. And so when I got to that place where I was able to examine and explore it for myself, and then I began to really line that up with who I am as a person and what makes life make sense to me, I began to see that a lot of the things that a lot of the ways in which I saw the world really wasn't the way I actually saw the world, if that makes sense. That the lens that I was looking through was muddied by a bunch of extracurricular stuff, things that were imposed, things that came from society, from upbringing, from the world around me, from the churches that I'd been to, etc., etc. And so therefore, I had to rethink, I had to relook. But in relooking, I had to turn the lens inwards. I had to turn it onto myself, like, okay, what's true for me? What is my value system? What do I want out of this game of life? I love that that video on YouTube by the guy who talks about the strangest secret, Earl Nightingale, and he talks about what do you want. In the middle of that conversation about the strangest secret, he asked us to ask the question for ourselves: what do we want? And by asking that question for myself and really ascertaining, and then also giving weight and heft to that, like being prepared to actually have the confidence to say, well, what I want matters in my life. Like, I'm not here trying to find out what I want for others so that I can manipulate them into trying to do my bidding. That's not what we're talking about here at the Idea of Man. We're talking about finding out what you want for you first and foremost, and beyond anything else. If you can square that circle for yourself, if you can come to the conclusions on those matters, and also then if you can give others the freedom to do that for their own lives as well, okay? Because understand, when you do that for yourself, you realize what a gift it is. We live in a world where everybody's trying to get people to do what they want them to do. Marketing and all these kind of things are all about kind of how can we manipulate the minds of people to buy our product, to do what we're trying to get them to do. Politicians are trying to get us to do what they want us to do. Preachers are trying to get us to do what they want us to do. Religions, ideologies, spiritual gurus, everybody wants us to do what they want us to do. But the question we have to ask is, what do I want to do? What's right for me? What makes sense to me? And if we haven't asked and answered those questions in our life, then the likelihood of us living a sovereign existence is very, very slim. The likelihood of us actually sitting on a third of our lives, we talk about, being the master of our ship, the master of our own destiny. Like, if you want to steer your ship to the shore of a destination that makes sense to you, you're going to have to take the time to perhaps overhaul all the ideologies to which you subscribe, rethink, revisit, explore and examine. And I'm not saying that your conclusions after you've done some thinking about these things may not come back to the same place you've already been. It may well be that you'd land at those conclusions and say, okay, you know what? Actually, I do subscribe to this. I do believe that this is the truth and whatever else. However, if you haven't yet explored it, then it may be sitting on a less secure foundation that presently you actually think it sits upon. And so by exploring it, maybe you can set a deeper foundation for those things, or perhaps the foundation will crumble and you'll have to revisit and rethink and go deeper. And that's, although that might feel like a scary thing to do, if you think about it in reality, the benefits of looking at life from that perspective is to liberate your own soul, to liberate yourself, to give yourself the opportunity to subscribe to something that's practical and meaningful to you, that in fact can impact your life at a meaningful day-to-day level. So first of all, it heals your heart because you've given yourself the permission to live your truth, to live the life that's real for you. And secondly, as you begin to live that life and as it begins to resonate with the life that you're living. So, for example, if you have a spirituality that actually makes sense to day-to-day life, for example, now I subscribe to I utilize 4 different modalities to help me in my spirituality. I use prayer, I use meditation, I use devotional reading, And what's the other one? There's another one. And journal writing, devotional reading, prayer, and meditation. When I pray, I don't pray to a deity or like a god. I pray to the universe, to source, because I recognize that um, my existence didn't come about like from my own kind of volition, as it were. That something beyond me exists in the universe, and that thing that exists is not like dead. It's not like like say your great grandmother may have passed away, but I do believe that the original womb from which I was ever hewn still exists, and whether that exists simply in a DNA imprint upon my own existence or not. I believe it's more than that. I do believe that spirit exists all around me, and in fact, and within me, within the very essence of who I am. And so, therefore, by meditating on those things, by connecting my own mind, again, which exists outside the physical dimension, by allowing my mind to go there, I find that I get downloads and I get inspiration. Even the things that I'm talking to you about today come from the downloads and the inspirations that come from moments that are spent in meditation, that are spent when I get to still myself and quiet myself and allow my own being to connect to the universe and connect to those spaces. So I use meditation to do that. I also, if I'm praying, then I will speak to that. I will speak out my intentions, my desires, my hopes, my dreams. I will express my sorrows. I'll express what's going on for me, and I will allow my connection to source to grow, to develop, to foster, and to happen. It happens by those moments of meditation and of prayer, just speaking out, and also just not speaking or saying anything, just breathing and just being in the presence of that potent spiritual reality that tempers all of existence. It's such a beautiful experience. So those are parts of my spiritual practice, as well as journal writing. So I write down a lot of the conclusions that I come to, the things that happen for me along the journey. And then also I read devotionally, as in, there's books that I might read for education, there's books I might read for entertainment, and there's other books that I read because of their spiritual upliftment, because of what they do when I read them and how they assist me in sort of helping my mind to think about things that pertain to spirituality. I don't any longer read the Bible. When I was a Christian, I read it through 17 times from cover to cover. I also used to read, at random different parts of it. I used to read it if there was a Bible study or something. I used to read Proverbs every single month because you've got 31 chapters in there. So I'd read that at lunchtime every day and go through that over and over again, year in, year out, month by month. And other favourite parts of the Bible, like Ecclesiastes, which still is kind of a favourite part of the Bible to me, because it kind of, for me, expresses, for anybody who knows about the book, kind of the vanity and the pointlessness of many things of existence, but then it zeroes in on, I suppose, the key parts that, like, relationships are really important, that finding work that actually aligns with your heart and your soul, your purpose, is really important. And for me, that's true, so that resonates for me, whereas many other aspects of the book don't resonate with the way I look at life and with what I'm after in this game. And so I don't read it anymore. It doesn't have any relevance to the way I'm thinking. There's odd verses that pop up in my mind because, as I say, I read it a lot of times. And so therefore, from time to time, I might consider something that's from there. And it's interesting in spirituality as I flow through that, how little things kind of tie in, or I see things from a different perspective now. And so a scripture verse might illuminate something, but however, there's so many more interesting books that help my mind to go into deeper places. So I might read things like Swami Vivekananda, very interesting person that I read from time to time. I might read things like James Hollis, a tremendous psychologist who speaks about things that cause me to challenge, am I living my life in accordance with my soul's truth, things of that kind. So there's many other books which have a great resonance from a perspective of spiritual philosophy that enable me to connect on that level and to do that devotional work. And that's how those are the modalities to which I subscribe to, that I utilize day to day to interact with the divine, to interact with what I understand to be spirit. But in that context, I absolutely don't need for myself or believe in any kind of religious ideological perspective. It doesn't help me to kind of be around people doing spiritual things, listen to some guru telling me this, that, or a third thing. Like that's I don't need a middleman in that respect. Like the spirit is all around. It's within me and it's all around me. I am a spiritual being, so therefore, that is what that is. And I'd much rather listen to people, if I will listen to them at all, who see the world from that perspective. That resonates and holds true, because that makes sense. And also, one of the things that's become very real for me is the fact that my perspective is not something that I need to impose upon anybody else. This is in no way evangelistic. Like, I don't care what anybody else believes, or you know what I mean. There's not an argument here. The perspectives that I've arrived at for myself have come through blood, sweat, and tears. Has come through deep lived experiences, come through very, very meaningful life experiences for me that make so much sense to me, and have healed me mentally and emotionally, if that makes sense. They've touched parts of me that I couldn't touch. They've gone inside and have helped me to change and to transform. Change can be very hard for us as human beings, and as men, we can struggle to actually grow beyond our phobias, our weaknesses, our limitations. So when we interact with spirit, and as a result of that, we change. For me, that's very precious. I take that seriously. When I actually see within my life the capacity to change, when I've overcome addictions, when I've overcome bad habits, when I've changed behaviors within my life, that's priceless. That's the big stuff. So for me, anything that's going to practically help me to grow as a person, expand my consciousness, communicate more effectively with my wife, with my children, with myself, have sit better in my own skin, enjoy my lived day-to-day experience, fulfill my purpose, something that's going to motivate me to grow, to expand in the way I live my life. Those are spiritualities to which I find are practical, are real and meaningful, are worth subscribing to. They're worth the investment of my energy and effort and time. However, if they are simply that which is imposed externally because it was the culture that I was brought up in or whatever, there's no relevance to those things to my life. I have no time for such things. It is what it is. It's just passing clouds. I don't want to sit on my deathbed, look back on this beautiful experience, this opportunity of existence, and wonder why did I do all the stuff I did, or just because. No, there's an opportunity that I have, and this is what here at the Idea of a Man we're talking about, is you have an opportunity to live a life. What are you doing with that? Like, how are you living out yours? And let's form a band of brothers who encourage each other on the journey to do the things that we're here to do, to find out and discover for ourselves what makes sense to us, what brings healing and transformation to us, what enables us to fulfill our purpose as unique individual men. This is what the Idea of a Man is all about. And I hope that in your spirituality and in your practical day-to-day life and your relationships and all you put your hand to, in the work that you do day to day, you find things that help to square that circle for you and answer that question for you and resonate as true for you. Because I do truly believe that fulfillment is possible, but also that oftentimes the obstacles that are in the way is our own perspectives, our own ideologies, and our own subscribed to notions. And I say our own because they are external, they are pressurized from outside, but yet it's our subscription to those things that enable them to have any power. The moment that we say, oh, wait a minute, and we challenge it within our own life, and we take responsibility for our own existence, and we sit back again upon the throne of our own lives, we begin to act like an adult. We begin to take responsibility for the direction that our minds are going in, for the way we're thinking, for the way we're seeing the world, and also for how we show up day to day, and which is both liberating, empowering, and healing all at once. So that's really our talk about spirituality today at this particular podcast here on Spirit. Next time we're going to be talking about soul. We're going to get into how that, all that that entails, because the fact is that as beings we have a soul within us, a consciousness within us is actually living within this physical body. So before we even get to our conversation on body, we have to explore what that consciousness is. And one of the beautiful things that I've read, I think it's in the book called The Master Key, is that a drop from the ocean is no less a part of the ocean. And when we talk about spirit, we're talking about the vastness of all that is, the mystery of the universe. But when we're talking about our soul, we're talking about that drop from the ocean that exists within us, that very, very personal aspect of the divine that makes us part of divinity, that enables us to connect directly to that. And this is why we don't need a middleman. We don't need anything else, any appendage, anything to add on we can actually connect directly to that because it is a part of who we are, and that therefore is our birthright. So I would like to encourage you as a man to do that exploration this week, this month, this year, to ask and answer those questions for yourself. The unexamined life is truly not worth living, because when it comes to conclusion, you'll be sitting there wondering, why did I live the life that I lived? So have yourself an amazing week, and we'll be speaking again very shortly, and the conversation, as I say, will be about soul before we have our conclusion of the 12 chambers and talk about the body. Thank you for listening. This is The Idea of a Man. Omar Zach Phillips signing off.